then it was eerily quiet. And then my mind was kind of like, you know, the head in the fishbowl.
Then it takes me into the bathroom and says, this is how you brush your teeth. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat.
But there were two girls, and it was like, you'll have to give us a ride. You can't tell us no. You can't refuse us. He'll let us in his car.
Thoughts were all alone in this empty void, you know, the head in the fishbowl.
This doesn't look right. They got close enough where he said he could see, you know, their eyes and how intelligent they seem. This doesn't look right. These gremlin-type creatures. This doesn't look right. No pupils, no iris, 3 fingers, 3 long fingers. And this is when the mental torture.
And then it was eerily quiet.
Hello.
Hey, Adam.
How's it going, Rob?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty decent.
I'm hearing some serious bass outside. Do you hear that?
Yeah.
I wonder if that's
Neighborhood's going to hell.
picking up over the mic. Just as soon as we start recording, some bass starts thumping. And Surfiel, what's up, man?
What's up? Not a whole lot. Just looking forward to the program.
Was that your bass thumping?
Yeah, it's probably some new bang.
One of these days they'll be pumping some new bang productions.
They already do, man. They already do.
All right. Awesome. Well, Rob, you stressed out, man?
No. I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, all things considered. So, Surfiel, you seem like the kind of guy that knows how to keep squirrels out of a building.
Squirrels?
Yeah. We've been invaded multiple times recently, and it's starting to drive me crazy.
Start busting the cap in that ass.
No. I've sawed down every branch that's near the studio. I've tried covering up holes. They just chew new ones. I don't know what to do.
Like, what about mouse traps?
Yeah, I could do that. Like, because there can't be that many of them.
Oh, I don't. We probably don't want to get into trouble with PETA or anything.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, I'm trying
make
to
a humane trap and simply release them back into your backyard.
Yeah, we don't want any crazy people coming here and shoot us up like they did YouTube, right?
Ugh.
The Iranian PETA members. How about that?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
We should ask our guest about that tonight. He wrote a little blog on it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We got Loren Coleman coming on.
She was mad about the YouTube policy, right? The policy change.
Yep. She's mad about them about her videos being demonetized. And they said stuff like that some of her videos were inappropriate because apparently she was wearing exercise clothing and they said that was inappropriate for children. So she gets on in one of the videos and says that she had like Nicki Minaj and all these other like, pop singers. They said that was inappropriate. Well, why did YouTube say that she was inappropriate? So she goes over there with a gun and shoots up the YouTube headquarters.
Yeah,
this
crazy.
was last Tuesday as we're recording this on the
Really?
10th.
I didn't even hear about it.
You haven't heard about this?
No.
Really?
Dude, I live in a hole. Like, seriously.
As soon as I saw something about it, I was like, oh, God, it's going to be someone responding to some of the YouTube censorship, and they're going to use this to demonize all the alternative media people even more. But then it was just about money.
Yeah. Well, see, honestly, the first thing I thought was it was probably somebody like an info warrior.
Yeah.
Probably going out there and doing that. And that's what I immediately jumped to. And then when I heard that it was just some woman that was pissed off about about her money being made, not being made, that was doing it, But it was funny, the media coverage of it, because they really didn't cover it that much. Because it really just it didn't have the sell point to it as like the conservative wacko going in there and killing a bunch of people.
Yeah, I think some of the conservative press was at the very start trying to capitalize on her being from Iran. But after that, it kind of just fizzled out. Right.
Well, they said something like she was a Muslim PETA member from Iran. And I mean, she's weird. She was weird looking too.
Like, she looked crazy.
I mean, some of that stuff she looked like she was made out of plastic.
Yeah, she looked crazy.
And the cops apparently they failed to prevent anything because apparently like her parents are her brother called the police and said they were concerned about what she was going to do, and they needed to check up on her, and they did go check up on her, but nobody took her into custody or to take her back to her parents. They let her go. And then the next 30 minutes, but literally I think like 30 minutes to an hour later, she goes and shoots up the YouTube headquarters.
A lot of the right
Nobody died, by the way.
Yeah.
There was like 3 people wounded or something.
A lot of the right-wing media have really gone into the fact that it was declared a gun-free zone just a few days prior, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they're like, see.
Well, since we're still on this topic, it seems like every time that in America we were always talking about this topic. I did get a message on Facebook from a listener that lives in Australia. And I thought I would read this because this is interesting. He is responding to where I made the comment that I really didn't know what the state of gun control in Australia was or what sparked it or anything like that. So
yeah,
he gives a really good synopsis here.
Yeah, in the context we were talking about gun registration and guns being taken away and how the order of how all that happened and whether or not it affected mass shootings and all of that. So
right. And I really appreciate also that this listener decided to drop some knowledge on us instead of just telling us that we were wrong. And,
oh yeah, by all means, correct us anytime you can or help us out. Because
so he says, long-time listener, first-time contactee, which I thought was interesting from the discussion. He calls himself a contactee of us, not an alien contactee.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought.
I'm from Western Australia and a firearms enthusiast. Just listened to episode 205 and thought I could share something for you. Our government drafted legislation in 1992 for the requisition of our semi-automatic long arms and shotguns. In 1996, we had a massacre that was highly questionable and was blocked by Parliament for an inquest for 30 years, which meant the shooter never received an actual trial, and all evidence that gave doubt was ignored by the Crown. They then enacted the gun control measures and bought the firearms back from legitimate owners. Now Australia is heralded as a prodigy for gun control and the outcomes. The only measure that was adequately implemented, which no one mentions, is our legitimate need for a firearm. They removed self-defense from the list and placed the burden on the states to provide defense for civilians. And by states, he means Australian states. They refer to those as states. This means we cannot own a firearm, pepper spray, taser, baseball bat, screwdriver, hammer for the purpose of self-defense. If we are searched randomly and the police deem we have an implement for self-defense, we are fined and face imprisonment. Our nation's burglaries, home invasions, thefts, assaults, rapes, petty crime all rose dramatically. We have had people arrested and imprisoned for defending their own home and children. We now have what's called equal force. We have to meet equal force without premeditation. This implies a burglar breaks in, he has a knife, I reach for my guns, I go to jail. If he assaults me and I use excessive force, I hurt him more because that is not equal force. I face prosecution. If I see him with a knife and I attack him, it was not equal because I took action before the criminal. It is the state's duty to provide protection now, and police at best are 16 minutes average call out. Now for our laws. We can have infinite magazines, but a 10-round capacity maximum. We face 7 years in jail for a 15-round magazine. Yet as a pistol shooter, I can change a magazine and reacquire within 1.2 seconds and take a center mass 10 at 25 meters. We cannot have such rifles as the Ruger 1022, as it is considered we will massacre, but I can own multiple concealable handguns with infinite magazines. ? We have a law in WA, Western Australia, called 26B of the Firearms Act 1976, which states of military appearance. We have single action .223, 5.56 rifles banned because they have an RIS rail on them for a scope. Yet we can buy 50 caliber rifles as long as it does not resemble something of a military appearance. This means with 26B, we cannot have paintball markers of a certain look or style, no airsoft, no gel ball blasters, BB guns, or even toy guns. What they do not tell America or the news is that the Green Party here, most anti-anything fun, is that a commission 3 years ago discovered that less than 1.6% of firearms ever commissioned in a crime here came from a legitimate source, i.e. stolen from a legal gun owner. That means that 98.4% of guns here that criminals have been imported are smuggled. A quick search in the news media for a man called Mick Gatto will see he received a $2,000 fine for a sawn-off shotgun pump action loaded in his toilet. This person is a career gangster and murderer. In our laws, he could have faced 49 years total for violations to our firearms laws. He received a $2,000 fine. A gentleman returning from a hunting trip in Meridian, Western Australia, lost his wallet, which contained his ID card and firearm license. He received 3 months in jail and 2-year good behavior with a 10-year suspension from owning a firearm because he was in possession of firearms he legally acquired and was legally registered to him, but because he lost his license that day and could not produce it, he breached the law. Make no mistake, even the consensus here is that they will take your guns and they will not stop until the criminals get off and the law-abiding are the criminal. This is no exaggeration. We hear in our news and media that they want to disarm the American population at all costs. We hear how great things are without law-abiding people having guns. We have massive gun problems here, except they are owned by nefarious people who would actually use them nefariously. I, as a sports shooter and hunter, abide by every law. I cannot be caught drunk driving, too many speeding fines, not paying taxes, etc., or I lose my ability to have a firearm. I cannot defend my life or any others, including my 5 children, or I will be in prison and can be sued by the criminals. People deny this and state it's crap. It is not. Once we do try and defend ourselves, we are guilty until we proven innocence, and then we do not get firearms back for a very, very long time. My wife cannot even carry mace. We have massive gang of violence issues, many ghettos in every suburb because of community housing. Many places you don't really want to go alone. Sorry this is long, but the consensus I got from your podcast is what you weren't sure. I will send a link of mass shootings and killings we have had since the disarming. They changed our definition to 5 dead, not 3 victims. Victims could have survived, including in the count. Then we had the Monash shooting and Hectorville. They changed it to 5, not including the shooter. And then he lists off a whole long list of shootings in Australia. Which is the next time an Australian says they've had no mass shootings since 96. And he gives, since 2000 to 2017, there's been several. And there's been others of a lesser number that have been people that have been,
but not the new definition.
People have not used guns. Yeah. Well, he said there's 2 categories. He says since 2000, and then massacres from 2000 involving other items. So in other words, everything in the top columns is a shooting from 2002 to 2017, and then from 2000 to 2009, where he lists 2000 Childers Massacre, 15 burned to death, 2001 North Ride Massacre, 3 stabbed, beaten to death, 2004 Mornington Spear Gun Massacre, 3 killed, Toowoomba Massacre, 3 beaten to death, on and on and on. And then stuff with cars. And this is, so in other words, even though they saw this real strict gun control, they still have these major massacres that are determined as massacres by the Australian government. They have more of them committed by people with guns than people without. So I thought that was really good. I thought that was a really good.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. And I asked him if I could read it on the show. He said, yeah. And so I thought, it would be a good clarification from somebody that actually lives there.
Right. And well, it sounds like he's describing the kind of situation that a lot of our more right-leaning citizens are worried about. But again, I don't think that is the only route for gun control that we can or should take, or that our country's even considering taking. You know what I mean? Like, I'm all about keeping guns away from crazy people.
Sure.
Like, if we can do that and leave the not crazy people alone, then, and I don't think that would be too hard, really. I think this is a really extreme example of the opposite and what it, the outcome could be.
Right. What's your thoughts on that, Sergio?
Well, I'm just thinking in parallel, if anything was even of that magnitude was able to even take place in here, the lag, of, I've heard a lot of, real strict gun control people say, oh, well, it's about eventually getting our society disarmed. And so, there'll be a messy time at first, I guess, where the criminals still have some guns, et cetera. But I mean, if that's Australia, just think about how many guns have been produced and are here in America. I mean, that type of lag, that time in between would be, I mean, I couldn't even imagine, all these law-abiding people being afraid to protect themselves. And
that's the thing. You're not going to keep them out of the hands of, you're going to create another black market like we have for drugs.
And we don't have to ship them in.
Right. Exactly.
There already is a black market.
Yeah,
for it.
absolutely.
And once you have any kind of real stricter gun control, it's going to just increase that, because people are going to find their way.
Yeah.
Are going to find a way to get their hands on stuff. Sergio's got a crazy story, but you told me something you saw at right across the street from where you work.
Yeah, I've seen a little 8-year-old pull a gun on some homeless people. I mean, it was, and that's not my only encounter, being on the.
I'm sure that 8-year-old really went through that extraneous background.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
But, I mean, and I know the arguments about, straw buyers and legal owners having a lot of guns and then being stolen, and gun stores which a lot of this crime wave right now in town, people think is because a lot of these gun stores right outside of the state lines and in the state have been robbed by organized gangs, or, then flooding the streets with them here. I understand those arguments, but it's just like the war on drugs. I couldn't even see, anything like that even being fathomable without just, the criminals just totally running things if they don't already,
I can't help but think that there's got to be some other reason that we've got a bunch of crazies out there that want to do these kind of things. I don't know what it is, but some deeper, rooted issue that's causing this here that, where you don't see this kind of stuff maybe other places.
Well, hopefully our guest might be able to shed some light on that. So let's go to the guests. I'll have some more things to talk about on the other side. I'm sure we'll want to discuss our guests as well. So, all right, we'll call it here, and we'll be right back on Conspirinormal. All right, guys, we're back on Conspirinormal, and on the line, we have someone that I am very happy to have on. I have followed this man's work for literally years at this point, and Loren Coleman is a cryptozoologist and a synchromysticist and all kinds of different things. He wears many hats. And Loren, welcome to Conspirinormal.
It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. Absolutely. You have a new book out called Mothman, Evil Incarnate. And
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about this book, which I understand is kind of a sequel or an updating to another book that you had written about Mothman. But Mothman is something that we actually, and as much as I'm into it, have actually not talked about on this show very much. So I just want to get kind of a brief synopsis of the Mothman mythos, what exactly happened in Point Pleasant in 1966.
Well, in 1966, a situation occurred where, as it's generally told, there were 4 individuals. They were all 20-somethings. They were young 20-year-olds. 2 couples were in a car in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and they were actually going to a Lover's Lane area. It's called TNT for dynamite. Used to be a dynamite storage area during World War II. And they weren't going there to neck or do anything like that. They were actually going there to see if they could see other people, see if there were teenagers they knew. And when they were there, they all of a sudden saw a creature on the ground about 6 feet tall or a little bit more coming towards them almost in a pigeon duck waddle sort of posture. But it had large wings that went down the side of its body, and they saw 2 glowing eyes because of the headlights of their car. And all of a sudden it flew up in the air, and they tried to get out of there very quickly in their car, and it chased them down the road. And this was November 15th, 1966. The big bird, as they called it, chased them back to the edge of town. They went to a little diner, and then they went to the sheriff's department, talked to the sheriff. The sheriff and some other law enforcement person came back out with them and actually saw a kind of a cloud of dust, and they heard some sounds in the old abandoned buildings, and the sheriff's deputy was too scared to get closer. And that story went around town pretty quickly, so much so that the next night when another couple and a woman with her baby saw the creature near their home, and it actually went on the roof. And then after that, the local newspapers started telling the stories of these sightings. And they kept coming out, with the stories. And in fact, a copy editor across the river in Ohio started calling this thing Mothman because Batman was a very popular TV show at the time. And so this copy editor named it Mothman, and that caught. Well, for months and months, over 200 people were talking about it, and 100 were eyewitnesses. And it got to be the mayor's son, a police officer, and all kinds of different individuals. The town of Point Pleasant was only about 5,000 individuals, a kind of beaten down riverside town right on the Ohio River. And it got to be the talk of the town. But there was a foreboding. People were having dreams, and they felt like something big was going to happen. And it turned out exactly 13 months to the day after that first publicized sighting, President Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was in Washington, D.C., turned on the lights for the Christmas tree in Washington, D.C. At the same time he did that, over the Ohio River at Point Pleasant, the Silver Bridge collapsed and killed 46 people. And so people really didn't want to talk about it. I mean, they mourned the dead. They talked about the Silver Bridge collapse and the tragedy. And yet this writer named John Keel came along and had been reporting all during the time of the sightings. And then in 1970, he wrote a chapter in one book. He wrote an article for Flying Saucer Review. And then in 1975, he wrote a book called The Mothman Prophecies, which was very popular at the time. It was published by Saturday Review, and a good publisher in New York. And I, of course, I was a friend of Keel's. I was investigating these stories. I knew all about it. And then it all kind of went away. It went away until the book was discovered years later, another edition of it. And in 2001, they filmed The Mothman Prophecies, and it came out in January of 2002. During the time that the movie was under production, I coincidentally was writing a book on Mothman because I felt it was time to write a book, because nobody had written a book since John Keel's book. And my first book came out at the same time the movie did. This book that we're talking about tonight, which is my second book on Mothman, is very different, because the first book was all about the incidents and other creatures and very cryptozoological and sort of creature-oriented. The second book that just came out really looks at the evil that's come out of these incidents and the other people that have died, and how John Keel's life really went downhill, and also looking at his book, and it's a much more psychological, sociological book. In fact, I'm the one that created the Mothman death list because we can go into that a little bit more, but that's kind of the basics of Mothman.
A question about Mothman. I've seen the famous picture, and it does, it does look like a moth, but is that because of just the name in and of itself, the name that it was given, that's kind of the artist's rendering? I mean, is there any differences between what has come down in like legend as to what people actually saw at the time?
Well, it really depends on what you're calling the famous picture. The Franzoni drawing.
That's the one, I think, yeah.
That was on the front of High Times, and that was a total creation based upon the name. The real witness drawings, the drawing that was on my first book, and some of the more accurate drawings of the Mothman, it looks like a giant bird that has the eyes in the chest, because that's the way people described it. Mm-hmm. The Franzoni drawing, and then the more recent edition of Keel's book that came out in early 2000s, that really picked up on the name so much so that the town of Point Pleasant, after the movie came out, they had a statue commissioned for the square downtown. And it's the Mothman statue that everybody now takes the picture in front of. And it looks like a giant insect. And
right.
These are all unfortunate because they look nothing like the real Mothman, nothing like what the witnesses said they saw. But it's now the popular image that people have in their heads because they've, the Mothman has become what everybody knows this creature by. But it could have been called the giant owl or the thunderbird, or there's lots of native names. But it's just, it's one of those things where media really dominated the legacy that is unfortunately more insect-like than bird-like, which this creature really is.
And the movie kind of furthered that vision or that image of it as well, too. Because there's a lot of moth imagery in the movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of moths that talked about, and the quote-unquote expert, which was Leek, which was Keel spelled backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Bates played the character that was a professor-like individual.
And you also had, well, let me back up. So some people, it looked more like a bird or like an owl rather than like an insect-like creature. So there were some attempts to explain it, as I think like the sandhill crane. Do you buy any of those attempts to explain it? I think there's anything to that. Okay, so Mothman is apparently trying to sabotage us, or is it Indrid Cold?
It's happened before to me.
Yeah, has it?
Yeah, I when the movie came out, I was the publicity person for Sony Screen Gems. So I did 400 radio interviews in a month.
Ooh.
And several of them had technical problems, and everybody was blaming on Mothman and different things. There was even WBOR in Boston, a PBS, our station started hearing squawking sounds like a giant mouse, which is the same noise that people reported Mothman had given out to eyewitnesses. So
really,
it was very strange what happens whenever you start talking about some of this stuff. And, obviously other people have had other problems with other phenomena, but I'm not surprised. I mean, there's no thunderstorms here, and so it's not at my end.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on.
We can blame it on Comcast. That's what I always do.
It's Comcast and Microsoft, the real evils in the world. Yeah. So,
well, Adam was trying to ask about some of the traditional explanations, like the sandhill crane, or if you've got like the great horned owls. And I wanted to elaborate on that and say that there's there's been cases of gigantism in a lot of the various species in the animal kingdom. We know that it happens in humans and other creatures as well. What are your thoughts on the possibility of any of that?
Well, some of the early explanations, such as the sandhill crane has a little red on its head. So a local university biologist was interviewed by the newspapers whenever these stories started coming out of Mothman. And sandhill cranes are too thin, not bulky enough, and it was just a way to try to explain it. Some of the owl explanations, some of the skeptics have written about, they thought it was an owl in a tree and different things like that. And owls did not match what was being seen, other than if you think about a giant owl. And I have an associate or research associate named Mark Hall, who wrote a book on thunderbirds, and he did a whole chapter in that book on Mothman, and he called it Big Hoot, because he felt that these Mothman reports, and they aren't just during 1966, 67, they go back over 150 years, but they look like a 5-foot, 4-foot tall giant owl. And they're actually in Cuba, there are some fossil finds of some giant owls that grew up to be 4 feet tall. And so there is cases of normal species that may be 10,000 years old or something like that actually match what Mothman looked like.
And also in the UK, there's also the Owl Man. Right.
Yeah, the Owl Man. There's also some Thunderbird reports from Pennsylvania and from southern Alaska, even the Bat Squatch reports from Washington State. It seemed to be a combination of a giant winged creature that looked like a Sasquatch also. So there's a whole lore of these creatures, and Keel wrote about them. I've written about them. I called them the winged weirdies. Because they certainly are there in the literature, in the Fortean literature, even before cryptozoology really started to look at them. And then there's the winged humans, too. A lot of people think of Mothman as some kind of human-like creature with wings, but that seems to be some of the eyewitnesses who are asked to retell their sightings 20 years later, and all of a sudden Mothman is growing hands and legs, and it's almost as if the eyewitnesses are making up new details so that they'll keep the TV documentary people interested.
There's some misconceptions about Mothman that are out there. And the one that I can think of that's really big is that Mothman caused the Silver Bridge collapse. But I've never really thought of that as true. That was more, he could have been like a harbinger, if even that.
There's a couple things going on with Mothman and that whole notion about the title of the book, The Mothman Prophecies, was something that the publisher gave that kind of overarching fear and loathing. Keel merely was trying to bring the facts out and share. And if you look at the continuity here, from the sightings to the people having the nightmares and all of that, and then the bridge collapsing, the story slowly grew its own mythos that Mothman was a banshee-like creature, a harbinger of death, and all of that. And the other part of this that I've really looked at and speculated on, if you look at Bigfoot reports, if you look at sea serpent reports, lake monster reports, you don't have this psychological element of fear and death curse and all of that. Mothman is very unique in that spectrum. You do have a lot of people thinking that Mothman is like, some kind of ghost bird or, banshee, that something is going to happen. We can talk about the sightings in Chicago is certainly giving people a lot of that flavor. And so much so that I've had people starting to look at the fact that if the Chicago Mothman reports started in April of 2017, we possibly, if there's any kind of similarity between the Mothman of Point Pleasant and the Mothman reports coming out of Chicago, we might have a big tragedy coming our way in May of this year, probably in the Chicago area.
There's so many facets to the story. I think that's why it's one of my favorites. You've got the not just the cryptozoological element, but then you've got that sort of mystic, spiritual kind of a prophetic side to it, and you've even got like the Man in Black stuff. Just so much bizarre stuff that kind of coalesces in this story.
It's such a mystery. Have people from all different fields trying to jump on, with their explanations. For instance, the late Jim Keith, who we all know from his books about black helicopters and other phenomena like that. He had this whole theory about Mothman, that it was a giant CIA experiment in which there was, LSD dropped in the water, and, the CIA just created this experimental 13 months where they were looking at how the residents would react and what kind of hallucinations they were seeing and different things like that. So much so that people that want to go off in that tangent can really think that there was something conspiratorial there. And then there's other people branching out from that maybe Mothman was nothing more than, because there is a lot of military in that area, that it was some other kind of military action going on, some kind of black ops. So, you hear a lot about Mothman that you don't hear about with some other cases, even like what happened in 1958 in Bluff Creek, California, about Bigfoot. You never hear any of those kinds of conspiracy theories really associated with those reports.
Jim Key's theory about it being some kind of experiment. Nick Redfern has a similar idea about the Flatwoods monster possibly being that as well.
Yeah, well,
so that's interesting.
Redford probably stole it from Keith. I'm just kidding.
That's another weird one. And you had Indrid Cold too, because you had this what was it?
Right.
Woody Derenberger in that. Well, I guess he really wasn't in Point Pleasant, but I think he was not too far from Point Pleasant, and everybody was talking about this weird being that came to him. This was all part of the contactee movement called Indrid Cold, which in the film is kind of portrayed as part of the Mothman, but maybe really wasn't.
The movie liked to merge all of that stuff together. And
right.
I mean, Jerry Clark is very clear in all of the work, that he's done in the UFO field, that Woody was making up a lot of that stuff about Indrid Cole. And that was just kind of to make money and get attention and all of that. So that's part of the problem with almost turning the Mothman prophecies into an episode of the X-Files, is that you can really throw a bunch of things in there.
Yeah.
And Sanderson, who did the original investigations of Flatwoods, told me early on, never try to explain one unknown with another unknown. And that's what I think once you start throwing in coal and all of these other theories, that it leads you down the yellow brick road and you really can't see where you're ending up except in Oz. So you have to be careful. That's why I like to go back to the cryptozoological. Was there a core animal there that was then causing all of these other people to get distracted and, really lose their sense of reality almost as they were trying to over-explain what was going on?
And another part about the mythology too is that, in the film it talks about, he was seen at Chernobyl or seen at some other disaster, and that was just made up for the film.
Well, yeah, that was definitely, and in my new book, I really deal with that. And I would appear in a lot of, I had to appear more than Keel because Keel had a cataract operation. They left the stitches in his eye.
Yeah.
So I had to pinch hit because he was really sick a lot when the movie came out. But what really they did, and it was really a disservice to the whole Mothman story, is they created these, Houston, Galveston, Chernobyl, all of these stories saying that Mothman was seen there before the disasters. None of that happened. And then what they created, and people that buy the special DVD of the Mothman prophecies get the hour-long documentary, The Search for Mothman, that both Keel and I appear in. And they put in that documentary as real all of these other disasters. So for the next 2 years, Keel and I, every time we were interviewed or had to talk about Mothman, we had to say, no, that stuff was myth. That stuff was made up. And you guys are, kind of going down the drain whenever you're investigating those stories because they didn't happen. So that was a sad part of it, because the movie had the possibility, and it actually did bring back Mothman into consciousness of at least Point Pleasant and a lot of other Forteans and cryptozoologists.
It definitely helped Point Pleasant out, put it on the map, so that they bring some tourism in, and much like Roswell,
Yeah, I mean, the Mothman prophecies coming out in 2002 saved that city, because when I went there, before the movie came out, to re-interview eyewitnesses, meet with Linda Scarberry and Marcella Bennett, some of the high-profile witnesses that were still in hiding, that town was a bunch of storefronts that were abandoned and empty. The highest point of the population of Point Pleasant was about 6,000 people right before the Mothman was seen. And the population has dropped below 4,000 now. And the business in that town was so dead. If it wasn't now for the Mothman Museum that Jeff Walmsley I just talked to the other day, and they've bought in a whole slew of those empty buildings, and they're leaving those other businesses that are in there for now. But they're going to make the Mothman Museum twice the size it is now, because that Mothman is the major industry now of Point Pleasant.
That's so it's interesting. Let's talk about some of these deaths, because I mean, that whole section in the book, I mean, you do a fabulous job of connecting all these different people's deaths to them. And of course, there's like 100 of them, so we can't talk about every single one. But what are some that kind of stand out in your mind that are rather unusual or just a strange synchronicity that occurred?
Well, there's a lot. Of course, there's the initial 46, the people that fell when the Silver Bridge did. And a lot of those were relatives of eyewitnesses of Mothman. What I started noticing when the movie came out was, as opposed to the eyewitnesses themselves, it sometimes was a brother, it was family members, and the Mothman death curse really quickly started touching the lives of those people around an eyewitness, around the director. Like the executive director of the movie died. He was an older man, but he died soon after the movie came out. And the one that really shocked me was Mark Pellington, who did Arlington Road, another really awesome conspiracy movie, and had been well known for MTV rock videos. He did the Mothman prophecies, and within a few months, his 42-year-old wife dies mysteriously, just really quickly and really bizarrely, in which it was some mystery disease. And it was very similar to me to Betty Heyer, who was the reporter in the Ohio newspaper. John Keel and Betty Mary Heyer, who was always going out doing investigations of the Mothman, of UFOs and stuff like that. She died 26 months to the day after the bridge collapsed. And she died at 52, which was still a relatively young age, even in the 1960s. And Freddie Freed, who was an NBC white paper guy, all of a sudden in his New York hotel room that he would use when he was away from home and working for NBC, his maid comes into his room and he's dead on his bed, very mysteriously. So there's these people over and over again. We're getting, even Jim Keith that we were talking about a minute ago. He goes to Burning Man. He falls off the stage of Burning Man, is a routine knee operation to repair his knee, and he dies on the operating table. So I really didn't mention it in the book, but during the time I was writing this book, my mother died, which is, kind of expected at 80 years old. But then my younger brother died.
Oh, man.
And so, you just things out whenever you're working on a book about death curses, I guess. But it is just amazing to me how many people. What I looked at almost immediately whenever I started catching on to the fact that people were dying like flies was that there's lots of different movie death curses, like The Exorcist or Poltergeist or things like that. But then you look a little bit deeper into those curses, and it's usually 4 people or 6 people. And here I was able to find 80 people, and then by the time I was writing the book, it was 100 people, and there's even more than that that are coming to mind after the book has been published.
Wow.
So it's just kind of frightening that it's really, really evil, Mothman. And you're right. It's not so much that Mothman causes any of this. It certainly seems to be a projection, a manifestation, a banshee-like aura that is around the Mothman.
It's certainly hard to write off that kind of number.
Yeah, it is.
This brings me to the subject of synchromysticism. And because I communicated with you a little bit about this, and you said that this kind of feeds this book is kind of a crossover between the two different worlds that you kind of inhabit, and then one of those you're best known for the cryptozoology stuff, but you also have a lot about this synchromysticism and this whole other blog, this whole other world that you talk about. And this to me is like the really fascinating material, because this is very much like kind of like a synchromysticism around this event. So what is the concept of synchromysticism?
Well, it's looking for meaningful coincidences, and through film, through events, and of course, I'm very interested in the name game too. The names of places, the names of certain individuals. Even John Keel was one of the early people that started looking at UFO witnesses. He said that the name Reeves kept showing up more than what most people would, most people would consider UFO witnesses should be named Johnson or Smith or Jones, but that's not true. It's Reeves, and you start looking at how often UFO witnesses or contactees or certain cases in ufology are named Reeves, and it does come up a lot. But then Jim Brandon, who wrote Weird America at the same time I was writing Mysterious America, he and I started looking at the name Fayette, Lafayette and Fayette, which is, of course, a French translation. It's the little fairy or the little enchantment, and that's a name that comes up a lot.
Interesting.
And so there's this underlying harmonic connection between certain names and Masonic history and even Egyptian Masonic history with assassinations like Martin Luther King being killed in Memphis, which is a Egyptian city. So it just kind of starts connecting to the whole universe, and we don't know what the answer is, but we are looking for patterns.
And that's called onomatology?
Yeah, you can use almost any of those names and pronounce them even better than I do. So.
For me, this ties a lot into like the just the general power of belief, and I think that ties back to the Mothman prophecy stuff a lot too, where I think that if you get enough people on board, and enough people with like maybe a negative idea or a negative atmospheric kind of emotion rolling, that maybe negative stuff starts to happen, or our consciousness kind of starts to self-prophesize things that are going to happen, or cause things that are going to happen, or that I think that's more the mystic side to that whole ordeal.
Yeah, I think that it's intriguing to me. I mean, having been in the field now for almost 60 years, it gives me a longitudinal view. And synchromysticism really doesn't come about until the year 2006. A bunch of thinkers, mostly in the Pacific Northwest, start putting together conferences and blogs and stuff like that. But I look back to the 1920s and 30s and then after Fort really started noticing synchronicity and Jung and all of those folks. Then you have Forteans studying Fortean phenomena, and you get some of the same things that he was looking at, special names, or how names would often, collect the data, collect the phenomena in a weird sort of way, so that all of these millennials or Generation X or Generation Z seem already primed and ready to go, so that when 9/11 happened, people started noticing, oh my goodness, there was lots of precursors to this. And you have somebody like Joe Alexander doing documentaries saying that Back to the Future, the movie Back to the Future, had a lot of clues that something was going to happen on 9/11. So it became part of the internet and media and movies in a way that couldn't have been possible when all we were doing was waiting for a letter in our mailbox to be to give us more clues about all of this phenomena.
Like a conspiracy theorist would look at that and say, well, the Illuminati or somebody planned this way in advance. But you're looking at it in a completely different way of saying that this is more like an event happens, and it like the it's almost like the ripples go forward and they can also go backward in time.
Right. It's more of a collective consciousness.
Yeah.
Kind of
like a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah, and I think that in many ways that's why you have a setup, an acceptance that there is a reality to the Mandela effect. I mean, I think I don't know if you saw this season's X-Files. Yeah, humorous episode of that, in which it was the Mingala effect. And I mean, that's so crazy to think that, but I have actually talked to people that their experience of reality was remembering something different than what you look on Wikipedia and find out it is, So there's something strange that feels like it's going on sometimes. And is that a pattern? Is that conspiracy? Is it, a harmonic reality? I don't know, but it's sure interesting.
It's definitely interesting. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you, when were you introduced to James Shelby Downard? Was it while you were doing correspondence with, while you were writing your book and while Weird America was being written also?
I think definitely during that time. It's an unknown part of my history and Jim Brandon's history that I think it was 1978. And in 1978 was my second book, Creatures of the Outer Edge. And then I was moving towards gathering all of my material in 1983 for Mysterious America. And Jim was writing Rebirth of Pan, which was 83. So we had the synchronicity of having similar dates. Well, he was in Illinois and I was in Massachusetts, and we were corresponding. I'd been corresponding with Kiel since 1969 or so, or the late 60s. But Jim and I got together and we said, well, he did Weird America and I did Mysterious America, and that was kind of one of those coincidences.
Right.
we decided to do a documentary pilot together. And we did this documentary, and it mostly had different things like the Bridgewater Triangle in it and other strange phenomena. And he narrated it, and I did all of the visuals, and I had friends that were filmmakers, and I was doing filmmaking. And it never went anywhere, but I went to Illinois to meet him, and we got to know each other better and better. And and that's when the whole Downard stuff came up, and I started just appreciating the guy. I never met him, but Jim Brandon did, and that's when he did his Sirius Rising material in 74 and 75, I believe it was. So, and the killing of the king ritual and all of that stuff, and Jack Parsons. There was lots of different material that was floating around, and as I mentioned in my new review of the Sirius Rising, I think a lot of people that are doing this kind of conspiratorial, connecting assassinations to Synchromysticsm don't really realize the whole history starts way back then in the late 60s. It just didn't all of a sudden in the 90s, people became interested in JFK and RFK and Martin Luther King. A lot of us have been studying assassinations for a long time. In fact, my interest in cryptozoology really started at the same time I was interested. I was a Lincoln assassination nut before Kennedy was killed. And I was very interested in the Civil War and how that assassination had an impact. And I knew from way long ago that assassinations almost always are conspiracies. And yet it's the mainstream government that tries to say it was one person because it's easier to explain and move on historically.
Right.
So it was very easy for me to, in my cosmos, to at least hear that there was a ritual of killing of the king. And certainly Downard, even though you have to have your hip boots on whenever you wade into Downard stuff. I still think there's things to be learned from other people's crazy theories because they're trying to communicate in the best way they can on amazing discoveries that they've found in looking at the world different than everybody else does.
Absolutely.
And the Sirius Rising material just got, I guess, is it technically re-released, I suppose?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The old cassettes or reel-to-reels that were floating around don't really exist in a way that people could use them anymore. So what's been done, and it just came out in a new CD in which it's a remastered CD. It has a new introduction to try to put it in the context of 2018. Synchromysticism didn't exist as a field of study back whenever Jim Brandon and Downard were having their conversations. So, it's really a new way to look at it for new generations.
And to clear it up, what it is this is these are taped conversations between Jim Brandon and James Shelby Downard. That's probably most famously mentioned in Robert Anton Wilson's Cosmic Trigger book as being one of the King Kill 33, the introduction to the King Kill 33 theory, and Wilson said it was one of the, I forgot the exact quote, but the most strange conspiracy theories of all time.
Right. And it is mentioned in those few copies that people have of Weird America that are still around from the 1970s because there's many, as I know from Jim, there's many people illegally reprinting it in Asia. And a lot of, if you go to Amazon and try to buy a copy of Weird America, Jim Brandon's not getting any of that money. But,
oh, really?
It does have a lot of, it has a lot about Downard in that book. The other one is, of course, Adam Gorightly. He has, done the biography of James Shelby Downard. And that's another way reading about JSB, as we call him.
Yeah, we actually, I did a show real early because this is like episode 206, and we did episode 33. I made sure to do that for the King Kill material when I had Gorightly on about that. So,
good one.
And then he was the 33rd person to like my Facebook page back in the
day. There's your synchronicity.
Right. Yeah, he did that on purpose.
So this would this probably be a good segue to talk about your copycat blog, and kind of, it's really timely because of all the big massacres that have gone on recently. Maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about that.
Right. Well, in 1987, I wrote a book called The Suicide Clusters. And Suicide Clusters was not accepted by any mainstream mental health people or media people. So once the years started going by and people actually agreed with me that there were suicide clusters going on, then in 2004, 2004, I wrote a book called The Copycat Effect, because nobody would believe me that the copycat effect was a prominent media-driven behavior contagion phenomena. So once I proved that, and I started writing a blog to rub it in everybody's face that all these things were being copied all the time. And of course, Aurora, Colorado, the big copycat thing. First of all, there was Columbine in '99, and that really jump-started all of the school shootings. And then you had James Holmes and the Batman killing, the Dark Knight movie rises. And that got people really on the same page that there's something going on. So much so that actually you turn on CNN and at the bottom of the screen, every news is breaking news. It doesn't exist anymore. And, everything is breaking news because the whole media is driven on adrenaline now. It used to be there might be one or two school shootings a month, and now it's like one a week, two a week. And that's awful. It's just an awful phenomena. And I actually changed the name of my blog from The Copycat Effect to Twilight Language, even though it's still the copycat. The address is Copycat Effect, deep down. But the Twilight Language is trying to look at the phenomena behind all of the school shootings. And now we have vehicle rammings and workplace violence. And it just goes on and on. It just doesn't stop. And you can have things like Las Vegas where 52 people can be, killed, and people forget about it a week later. That's what's kind of interesting about Parkland. Is Parkland, of course, Parkland, Florida reminds me of Parkland Hospital where JFK was taken.
Yeah.
And there's a whole name games there. But because of the student activism, as someone said, and I wrote this in my blog, this generation of graduating seniors and some juniors in Florida really discovered their Vietnam. And Parkland has, as a social movement, stayed alive. Although, having people say they're going to stick a hot poker up David Hogg's butt is creating all kinds of distractions from what these to do, as far as change the conversation about school shootings. But we'll see where it goes. A lot of people forget that all of the protests for Vietnam really had many years of frustration. And there was also many years of people dying by suicide as far as self-immolations that occurred during the Vietnam War. And
Right.
I hope it doesn't get to that point with protests for school shootings. But I think it's going to be bad. And I've always warned in my blog about the end of April. And there's that special week in April, starting about the 14th of April through the 20-somethings. And you get Virginia Tech, you get Columbine, you get all kinds of
Oklahoma
very
City.
violent. Pardon me?
Oklahoma City, Waco.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Waco. Yeah, all of those that are right-wing as well as school shootings and other places. So, and it all started, you can go back to the Revolutionary War, and it's my sense that it's the danger zone in the calendar, that the media doesn't really want to look at and they don't want to talk about. And it just goes on and keeps happening year after year.
And you mentioned Vietnam. April 30th is when we really pulled out of Vietnam. That was the end of Vietnam.
Yeah.
And, you know, while Purgus knocked, you know, that's like April 30th to May 1st. So.
Yeah.
So
helicopters landing on roads.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the media's role in all of this is? Because I always equate it all back to, like, in the 70s, there was this epidemic of, I was talking to Surfiel about this earlier, like streakers trying to get on TV, and it kind of exploded for a while until the news organizations sort of got together and they were like, okay, if somebody does this, we're just going to pan away and not mention it and ignore it. And without that, publicity, it fades away. How much do you think that kind of stuff plays into all of these things as far as school shootings and mass shootings and just other things plaguing our society in general these days?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that if you have a culture that reinforces violence through guns, and then you add this layer on top of it in which the news media wanted to report on school shootings by creating wall, then it certainly reinforced it. And I actually do, in my book, The Copycat, talk about that example of streaking or suicides, cluster suicides. If you'll notice at every baseball game where there's any kind of streaker or violence or anything like a fight in the stands, they don't show it on TV. And yet there's something like 6 to 12 cameras live all the time at a baseball game.
Yeah.
And yet, because they don't show it, it tends to stop. Therefore, in the 70s, there was this very short-lived phenomena of people throwing batteries at some of the baseball players, but it disappeared because it wasn't reinforced. There was, heavy consequences for the batteries throwers, but there also was no reinforcement of it. Right. And same thing with streakers. And in fact, I point out in the book, at one time in Vienna, Austria, there was people that were jumping off of subway, areas onto the tracks, trying to kill themselves and actually dying on the tracks. So what Austria did is they put a ban on talking about that totally in all of the newspapers. And newspapers was the way that people were getting their news back then, not so much in TV. And then you also look at some of the newspaper strikes, and you'll see the suicide rate went down during those times. So the media has been very much a part of the copycat effect. After Columbine, there were 400 incidents in the next month of bomb threats, school shooting threats, and different things like that. Whereas in Canada, there was one shooting incident, and the whole media across Canada didn't talk about the shooter, didn't talk about the shooting. They briefly mentioned it in one local newspaper, but all of the media, and when I wrote my book, Copycat Effect, it was Simon & Schuster, mainstream publisher in New York City. I got one review in a North American newspaper, the Boston Globe, that absolutely tore it apart as saying the media had nothing to do with any of these shootings or anything. And,
wow.
And yet, all across Canada, I was interviewed by the Canadian Broadcasting Network, Toronto newspapers, Alberta, are open to looking at their part of the phenomena, that if they broadcast for 2 straight days about a phenomena, a week later there was going to be another school shooting, which is what happened in the United States.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm. You also talk about in the copycat effect in that the Twilight language blog. You talk a lot about the origins of names, and not just place names, but people's names and what they mean as well. And is there some meaning to that?
Well, there's people's names have a lot to do with Chuck Shepard, who is the one that really started looking at the middle name of Wayne, like John Wayne Gacy. And he really found that a lot of murderers or a lot of people who were accused of the middle name Wayne. And it was almost like a black mark. And then back to Keel and Reeves with UFO names. But then you start looking at a lot of Jim Brandon stuff, and what I've written about is, Washington or Shelby, a lot of names connected to Freemasonry. And not to say that this is caused by Masons,
right?
But it's intriguing that the harmony of the names, the harmonics of the names tend to go through some of the crimes, some of the killings, whatever, or even, you look deeper, like Aurora, Colorado. That's really Red Dawn. You have Colorado and Aurora. Aurora is the dawn, Colorado is the red. And so that kind of killing in the movie theater tended to really be a Red Dawn event, violence and a new wave of copycats, because you did get a lot of movie and other violence copycats.
Yeah.
So it's there over and over again. It's just a matter of looking at it. Most people, in one of my early books, in Mysterious America, I talked about how most people drive down roads. They don't even think about the history of the name of the road they're on, let alone their own history. Myself, being a Coleman is the ancient perceivers of the ley lines. So I don't know if it was my name or whatever, but I'm kind of cursed to always look a little bit deeper at what's going on.
So does that make you the successor to James Shelby Downer, like Jim Brandon says?
Oh, no, I don't think of it that way. I mean, in many ways, I listened to Sirius Rising, and I kind of have lost track that I've actually been doing much more than Brandon and Downard, just because I do it so much, doing the blog so often about names that, some of those guys did a book. Well, Brandon only did 2 books plus the talking book, whereas I think I'm up to my 30 or 40th book. So it's just, I don't even think about it anymore. I just have so much inside of me I have to share.
Have you beaten Nick Redfern in the amount of books?
No, probably not, because I don't steal as much stuff as he did. I'm kidding again. I'm just working up to, in Minnesota in I think it's October. We're both going to be at Paracon.
Okay.
And we thought we were both going to have an hour to present, and now they've made us present together. So I figure I've already got to start, harassing him.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Take control.
His new book about Slender Man was really, really interesting. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but that's some interesting stuff.
Well, my wife is in the book because she wrote articles for 40 Times on Paranoia.
Okay.
Paranoia magazine. So my wife was there before Redford was.
Ah, okay. Little competition. Sergio?
Well, competition is always good.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It keeps us all fresh, and we're all good friends, and we all share back and forth. So it's what we do. I actually had a Men in Black episode, so I was in his Men in Black book.
Oh, what happened there? What was your episode with the Men in Black?
Let's see. I was living in Illinois. It must have been, the dates in the book, but it's something like 1972 or so. I was doing investigation on the Enema Bandit. Ever heard of that? It was
The
somebody
Enema
that,
Bandit.
No, I've not heard of that.
Yeah. It would go tie up co-eds, and the one co-ed that was a little more, how can I say this politically correct? The one co-ed that was a little more plump than any other, he would give enemas to.
What?
And so, yes. So
Okay.
and what happened back in the 60s and 70s when I was investigating this different phenomena, there was no internet. There was no USA Today. How I had to investigate these was I'd had to individually write newspapers.
Yeah.
So I was doing this. I was actually writing, long letters saying I'm investigating this, I'm going to write an article. Because I never, at the point that I was investigating, there was no description of the person. So I was trying to figure out, was this some kind of entity? Was it a Fortean phenomena? What was going on? Was it a weird crime? So all of a sudden, one night, this was very late at night, maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock. You never expect anybody to come around then in Decatur, Illinois. And my first wife and I were sitting there, and all of a sudden the door, there's a knock on the door, and a guy comes to, he's there, and he says, "Hi, I'm Detective Applegate, and I need to ask you some questions about the Enema Bandit." Well, that was spooky enough. How in the world would he know I was writing letters about the Enema Bandit? So I invite him in, and he's one of these, dark suit, tall and thin, kind of breathing funny, and says, "You shouldn't write anybody anymore for Men in Black. For Enema Bandit material." And I said, "Well, why?" "Well, one of the, MOs of the Enema Bandit is that he collects newspaper articles." So I sort of like, wow, I'm collecting newspaper articles. I'm a suspect? Well, you might be. So I just keep talking and talking, and so he's a detective and all of this. So I, then he leaves, and I say, well, maybe I'll quit doing that case. I call the Decatur Police Department the next day and say, "Could I speak to Detective Applegate?" And there is no Detective Applegate.
Oh.
And then it didn't take me too long to watch the movie. I watched the movie Damned Yankees and find out that the character named Applegate, that's a really well-known pseudonym, and it just, wow, it kind of like, wow, what's going on? So I told Nick all about this, and he thought it was worthy of his book. Because it turned out I could never track down Applegate. I never could track down, and it was years later that I guess they caught the Enema Bandit. It was some, he was a perverse criminal and certainly into that stuff. But it's just one of those things.
Wow.
John Keel was very worldly, more than this little boy from 20-year-old something from Illinois. He said, "Oh, you don't know about enemas and enema bandits?" And he said, "You don't even know about Yellow Rain?" Yellow Rain? What's that, John? He was a big New York City writer, and I was just a Illinois investigator. I didn't know what Yellow Rain was or enema bandits.
Wow.
He told me all about a magazine out there called Screw. I didn't.
Further your education.
Further, I'm just no longer a naive Midwesterner. Sometimes things happen.
Well, Lord, it's been a real pleasure having you on. Where can people get this book and contact you? And also, just a little bit about the Cryptozoology Museum that you maintain up there.
Right. Well, the book, of course, is the Mothman Evil Incarnate is available all over. There are even some bricks and mortar stores I hear that still exist, but most people get their books online and even in Kindle and all of that stuff. So it's an ebook as well as a printed book, and then of course I founded the International Cryptozoology Museum in 2003, and we've moved that bigger and bigger places. We actually built a whole new museum in 2016, and we're at an entertainment venue development in Portland, Maine, called Thompson's Point. So if people go to cryptozoologymuseum.com, Cryptozoology Museum is all one word, .com, they have all kinds of information there. I have my books on sale at the nonprofit museum to give all of the profit to the museum, not for me, but that's a way for people to get autographed copies. There's also a bookstore in the museum that people buy stuff for themselves. And then September 1st and 2nd of this year, we're going to have a big international cryptozoology conference in which books and speakers and vendors and all of those good kind of things will be there. So I hope people find it interesting enough to visit us in Maine. A lot of people, we get visitors from all over. Even we had 2 individuals come in and they got to the door of the museum last week, and they actually were from New Mexico. And they were so out of breath, I thought they'd walked there. And then they said, thank goodness we finally made it to Canada. So Maine is still in the United States, folks. And so you can come, not have to have your passport to get into Maine, and then see the museum in Portland. It's a lot of fun. Our newest exhibit is cryptoscanology. So
yes,
that's been very popular.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Loren. We're so glad to have you. We're going to close the line. We're going to close out this section. Stay on the line for us, and guys, we'll be right back on Conspirinormal.
So in the interest of connecting more with our listeners, I want to share a little story about my morning.
Please.
Yeah, I'm getting older, as we all are, and yesterday I got home from work. Well, on the way home from work, I stopped at Walgreens, which is like a block away, and did my shopping, got my toilet paper, whatever I was there for, drove the block home, stepped out of my car. I was fine at Walgreens, got home, got in my car, and stood up, and my left knee just exploded in pain. Don't know why. I didn't step on it funny. I did not fall. I didn't bang it on anything, and it just hurt. I couldn't bend it. I couldn't twist it. So I staggered to the house, got to my recliner, and sat down and tried to just relax for the evening and take it easy on my knee, because I don't know what I did to it, but I did something. And it hurt all evening long. It hurt all night long. Like, I was tossing and turning all last night. And I finally got up this morning. I could put weight on it, but I couldn't move it. I couldn't bend it or twist it or anything. So I went through my normal morning routine. When I made coffee, got a cup, went outside, smoked a cigarette, and then I went to the bathroom like I do every day. And this was the most excruciating experience I've had in months. Okay, so I'm going to be frank here. I was sitting on the toilet, doing my thing. I could not get off the toilet. I couldn't stand. Doing my business. I couldn't stand back up, and because my knee hurt so bad that I could not get out of my sitting position. So I was like clawing at the windowsill, trying to pry myself back into a standing position. And it got to the point where I almost like called out for Alyssa to help me stand up off of the toilet.
Man, I gotta put you in a nursing home, dude.
Can you imagine if I had to get Alyssa's help to get off of the toilet to continue like going throughout my
Would
day?
you have felt emotionally just bad about that?
Not so
what you're
bad.
saying?
Only because she would never let me live it down. Ever.
That's true.
For the rest of my life.
She'd be like, "You remember that time, Robbie?
Yeah.
You
So-
remember?" That's my Alyssa impression. New listeners of the show might not remember when she used to be on the mic, but I think it's pretty accurate.
Yeah, that was good. That was good.
Man, it's it's just getting old, dude.
It is, and now it's fine. Like less than 24 hours later, it's totally back to normal.
Well, it's kind of like our internet in here. I mean, that's kind of like how
exactly.
That's kind of how it does. Apparently, we've had to switch to the phone the hotspot like the last two shows. I don't know what's going on, how it's so damned unreliable.
Yeah,
but it is what it is, I guess. I don't really know what to say.
Yeah, I'm totally okay with equating Comcast to a horrible bathroom experience,
or to a bad knee. Yeah. Well, like I said before to you earlier, it's probably all the times you jumped off cliffs when you were younger.
Yeah, and snowboarding and skateboarding, and
it's all catching up with you, man.
Oh yeah,
it's just that life,
Life gets you in the end.
What'd you guys think of that interview?
Oh man, that was awesome. Like, I thought going into this, Loren Coleman, we're gonna probably just talk Bigfoot or something. I knew he had a new book about Mothman, so I figured it would be heavy on that. But I was not aware of his the Synchromysticsm stuff, the internet blogs, any of his dealings with any of that kind of like side of our universe. So that was really, really cool.
Well, I read the book, and primarily a lot of it. It's a very short book, but a lot of it is in the appendix. The second appendix in the book is just that Mothman death list thing, and that was really interesting. So that kind of led into the whole synchromystical stuff. And Surfiel, he bought the Sirius Rising CD.
Yeah, when you first sent me the link to the Twilight language blog, like, yeah, I'm gonna have this guy on, and I was like, oh man, I've been checking out that blog for over a decade, and I didn't know about his. I didn't know that was him or too much about him, and I didn't really know about his cryptozoological stuff. So
yeah,
it was really cool how it just kind of ran through all these different subjects and tied them all in. It seems like with the synchromystic stuff. So it was a really, really interesting interview.
And he's tied in with a lot of other people that we talked to, like Adam Goraley and Greg Bishop and all those guys. And, and he knew John Keel, who Keel was pretty instrumental in a lot of the kind of weirder aspects of the UFO phenomenon and what that all meant. And, Keel, reading Mothman prophecies for me, I saw I was familiar with the Mothman case of the Jerome Clark book, but I actually saw the movie first, and not knowing some of the stuff that the movie was based on, I started reading John Keel's Mothman prophecies, and that is an extremely strange book. Keel got really, really like obsessed with everything that was going on with the whole Mothman milieu around Point Pleasant.
Right.
And there, like I said, there was just all this weirdness, UFO contactee stuff, Men in Black. And actually, in Point Pleasant, there's the Low Motel that is there. And it's actually one of the most famously haunted motels in West Virginia.
Really?
And not too far from there is where the Flatwoods monster happened. So this is like a lot of weird stuff about West Virginia. I don't know exactly what that is, but there's some weirdness there. But Keel, he would talk about in the book about going back to New York City. And he also talked about how he would just get these phone calls in the middle of the night and people following him, much like kind of like gang stalking kind of stuff. He also talked about this really weird events that happened on Long Island, which made me think back to like Amityville and all the things that happened there. So there's just certain spots in the world that are just strange.
Yeah.
You know? So I wanted to share something with you guys.
Yeah.
I've been watching X-Files, right?
Me too.
And I've been watching it on Hulu. And Hulu makes you watch commercials even though you are you pay a certain amount. I don't know why they make you watch commercials. But I ran across this one, and you'll be wondering why I'm playing this until you hear this is a commercial for Balsamra, which we are not advocating Balsamra.
Not a sponsor.
In any way. They're not a sponsor. But listen to the list of side effects as this goes on.
Despite all of the things you do to get a good night's sleep, it can feel as if they get undone. While you lie there, restless.
So reassuring.
Maybe you should talk to your doctor about Balsamra.
Maybe you should.
Prescription medicine for adults with insomnia who have trouble falling or staying asleep. Balsamra is an FDA-approved sleep aid that works differently because it targets and inhibits the action of orexin, a neurotransmitter in your brain that is believed to play a central role in keeping you awake.
You don't need
In clinical
that.
studies versus placebo, Balsamra helped patients fall asleep faster and sleep more throughout the night.
Do not take Balsamra if you have narcolepsy. When taking Balsamra, don't drive or operate heavy machinery until you feel fully awake. Walking, eating, driving, or engaging in other activities while asleep without remembering it the next day have been reported. Balsamra should not be taken together with alcohol. Abnormal behaviors may include aggressiveness, confusion, agitation, or hallucinations. The temporary inability to move or talk, known as sleep paralysis, for up to several minutes while you are going to sleep or waking up, and temporary leg weakness have also been reported. In depressed patients, worsening depression, including risk of suicide, may occur. Alcohol may increase these risks. Side effects include next-day drowsiness.
So if you're looking to get more sleep, keep doing the things that help. But also, talk to your doctor about Balsamra.
Okay.
Sleep paralysis. Oh god.
I don't know.
I'm good.
You might drive your car without remembering it or have sleep paralysis. So what? I don't see the big deal.
Well, two things. Not remembering what you're doing because you're essentially sleepwalking. And they actually talk about, there's actually things people talk about when, people have murdered their spouse.
Yeah, they gave you a nice little alibi right there. I was just taking
because they were actually sleepwalking. There's a movie called, I think it's called Side Effects, that came out a few years ago that kind of deals with that. If it's like a Steven Soderbergh movie, you should check that out. Kind of deals with that kind of similar thing. But also the sleep paralysis, it causing sleep paralysis. But this Balsamra sounds like a good time, man.
Like not remembering driving your car. Like it's so casual. Like, you might run to the store and back in middle of the night. But it's okay.
You might run over somebody.
Yeah.
You might kill somebody and not remember it ever actually happening.
And sleep paralysis every morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you're waking up.
Yeah. So you can contact spiritual entities while you're on Balsamra.
Side effects may include dark, shadowy spiritual entities hovering above you while you cannot move, being stuck in between dimensions.
And you can't get out. But at least you're not going to have insomnia anymore. Oh my God. How is stuff like that approved, dude? How is that approved by the FDA?
Yeah, what's the function of the FDA?
Oh my God. And I was watching this video of some girl that she was talking about how Balsamra really helped her, and they said not to take it if you have narcolepsy, but she was taking it for her narcolepsy.
Can you imagine? I mean, if this is all stuff that's on the market, what about like weaponized stuff that's off the market, like some MK Ultra type of stuff? Like, what about what if there is some kind of weaponized medicine that will induce sleep paralysis in people? That's torture. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, you talking about a serious drug to cause something like that. Now we don't know, what percent of the population it probably causes that.
But I'm just saying,
oh my God.
If it's known that some medications can produce that, what could be actually produced to specifically get that?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, that just blew my mind when I saw that.
I've never heard sleep paralysis and the side effects before.
No.
Yeah. Or basically being in a waking dream. That one is scary in and of itself. Okay.
I mean, if it was may cause lucid dreaming, sign me up.
Visions of cryptozoological creatures, Mothman.
You might see Mothman staring at you.
Alien abductions.
Oh, and hallucinations. I mean, it talks about hallucinate. You're gonna just see a bunch of weird shit.
Prophetic visions may occur.
Mothman prophecies
may occur.
Going back to the Mothman stuff, I was while we were talking, I was googling this gigantism in animals. Because I mentioned that to Loren while we were talking. There's been a lot of cases of most of the largest, most bizarrely large specimens of a lot of creatures that have been found have been much larger than the average. Like there was an elephant that was I forget it was 27,000 pounds, which is over twice the size of a normal grown adult male.
Yeah,
things like that, So I was just thinking, what if this was a great horned owl with a genetic disorder? Because those things get 3.5 feet tall when they're normal. So if you imagine one that's 5.5 feet tall,
yeah,
they could look you in the eyes.
Yeah,
that could totally explain the whole phenomenon. And there's tons of precedent for it. He even said there was, there's been skeletons found of
giant owls. Yeah.
Giant owls.
10,000 years ago, which isn't a very long time in
geologic
time.
And that might have been a different species or something, but still, if it was just a specific case of a genetic disorder or something, that would terrify the crap out of anyone that saw it.
Well, one of the aspects of the Mothman case, and some people have looked at this, that it happened in this TNT area.
Yeah.
Which was this place where they put the side side products of dynamite or TNT production, they would store it there during World War II. And some people have said, well, maybe it was some kind of weird mutant that, that was chemically, its DNA had been chemically enhanced or something like that. I've heard that as a theory put forth for Mothman too.
Well, and owls can be very aggressive.
Yeah, they can be.
I've been attacked by an owl.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was a young teenager, I was outside in my backyard talking on the cordless phone, and I was just walking around, and this thing just came down and knocked me in the head. And so I went tearing down the yard, and I was jumping down flat as it would swoop down on me, and it was pretty scary. My mom's kind of mystical, so she was like, "Oh, it's your spirit animal." I was like, "It's trying to kill me, Mom."
Are you sure it was an owl? Did you have any missing time?
No, it was owl. I saw it.
Well, I mean, we're gonna talk about this. Mike Clelland's coming back next week.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that.
Because he's got a new book called Stories from the Messengers. We talked about his book, The Messengers, where he talked about the different theories and he had some of the stories, but this is all the stories that he has collected through making that book.
That's going to be awesome.
So, yeah, I'm going through that now, and I'll send you guys. So it's going to be real interesting to talk to him more about the owl stuff. And the 5-foot owl, there's actually quite a few stories that he has about that, about the people having these UFO encounters and then seeing some kind of large owl right in front of them. So the Mothman, the name is really just kind of a misnomer.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So there could be a lot more to it that has a connection to his material as well. So that's next week. So stay tuned. All right. Well, I think that's it.
Hey, did we mention the episode we just did with Loren?
Yeah. We actually did a Patreon. We did about 20 more minutes with Loren Coleman about Rob's favorite subject.
That's right, Phantom Clowns from the expert himself.
Yes.
The man who coined the phrase.
Yes.
So if you want to hear that, go to patreon.com/Conspirinormal and you sign up for...
Rob will never listen to it again, but
yes.
you can.
I'm going to have nightmares tonight, and I'm doing it for you. So go to patreon.com/Conspirinormal. Our lowest tier, you get access to all of it, all the bonus episodes that we do. It helps us pay for hosting and website costs and all the little things that cost us money to produce the show. And we appreciate all of you guys that are out there that are already subscribers. Anyone else that's interested, go check it out. If you don't want to subscribe and you want to contribute to the show, you can go to our website at conspirinormal.com and just do a one-time donation there. And if you don't have any extra cash, but you still want to support the show, a great way to do that is just a 5-star review on iTunes, because we really appreciate all of those. They help us get the word out. They, boost our ratings there so more people can find us. And yeah, thanks to all of you.
Yeah, thank you to all the patrons. Send us money for our cigar fund.
Keep the squirrels out of my studio.
Yeah, there you go. All right, guys. We'll be back next week. Luke didn't make it tonight. I'm crushed. But yeah.
We'll see him someday.
Maybe someday. All right, guys, we'll be back next week on Conspirinormal. Enema.